One of the components that's important that we have to reach for and kind of bring back, I'm not sure if we can bring it back, but if it has been a great force in America is the diversity, right? What you see is a whole set of different people here, different ages, different races, but together, the spirit of unity and love that is here. So we hope that gets not only infused into this region, but also globally, that we're able to start the ball rolling, all of us collectively together, because there are things that you're seeing above the ground. You see that happen, but there's a lot of activity beneath the surface to make that thing appear. And so it takes all of us collectively to make this work in our communities. And so thank you for being here with that. We're going to kind of break it down into kind of 3 sections, and then we'll do some Q&A at that. We're going to talk about the past. It's important not to get stuck there, but it's important to talk about it. It's important if you got hurts or hang-ups or challenges, and I appreciate those who are online. Let's talk about it. So let's get to a place where we at least address it and then kind of move forward. So we'll talk about the past. And then we'll talk a little bit about the present. They'll get us some issues and challenges that are with us in America, and so we're going to have to address those. If we put our head in the sand because we don't want to address it, it doesn't go away. It just seems like it gets worse. So we have to address it. We have to talk about that. And then we'll talk about the path forward. Once you've addressed it, you can't just stay in it. We got to figure out a collective path forward. The challenge we have is you can only see what you can see. So if I'm looking forward, I can see a little bit because of my periphery to my right and to my left, but I can't see anything behind me. But you can. You can see everything behind me, and you can warn me, or you can encourage me, or you can strengthen me, but I have to build this bond of trust that what you're telling me is absolutely true so I can act accordingly. That's how we build that. We build with these kind of forums, this community of trust with each other, and then the strengths that we have take us all collectively and in the community to the next level. So let's talk about the past. And I believe Dr. Sims is going to do that for us.
So there's a lot of challenges, a lot of places we could go as it relates to talking about the past. Again, one of my objectives is to remind us that we have to own and take responsibility for the challenges associated with Christianity and our past when it comes to unity and reconciliation. Unfortunately, if you go to the Elmina Castle in Ghana, West Africa, you'll be reminded that they had governors, and the governors had direct access to the dungeons where the females were. African females were stacked like sardines, and their menstruation and their urination and defecation created more death than anything, and the governor would have them hosed down and then pleasure himself. After the governor, it was the soldiers who lived at the castle, and after the soldiers, it was the priest and the church officials, because there was a church built in the castle. And so we have issues when it comes to what Christianity has represented historically. Some of you are aware of what would be identified as the pre-Adamite view, 1559. So the first slaves came in the transatlantic slave in 1483, not here to America. 1483, we talk about 1619. But if you go to the castle and read the history, 1483, Portuguese began to enslave Africans first. And the challenge is that theology has not always represented the truth of God. Those who are Christian haven't always used the word of God for his purpose. And so selfishly and in the flesh, the pre-Adamite view says in 1550 and last published in 1880, the same publication, that there was a civilization that existed before Adam. Genesis chapter 4, Cain marries somebody. We don't know who that is, right? Because we can't find anyone other than these 2 boys who were born to Adam and Eve. But Cain marries somebody. So the story goes that Cain married one of these pre-existed people before Adam, and Cain being the villain that he was, and that interracial relationship created the black people. Because they were not born of Adam and therefore not human, that made them soulless like a cow or a horse. And since these creations don't have souls, they don't need to be treated like humans. So when the Constitution was written in 1787, we were identified as 3/5 of a human from the pre-Adamite view from Christian theology. So when you talk about history, our history as believers isn't the greatest. And we still today are trying to figure out how do we model this need to love one another and demonstrate that God is love in essence. He's not doing love. He's not practicing love. The Bible says in 1 John chapter 4, verse 7 to verse 16 that he is love. And so we haven't figured out as a body how to deal with this history because we still have present day challenges with falling on our knees, confessing one to another our sins and coming together. So when we start talking about history and we look at Hollywood, it's hard to find a person of color in a Hollywood movie. If you want to talk about Michelangelo, if you want to talk about Leonardo da Vinci and these pictorials of Christianity. So the creation of Adam has God as a white individual, Adam as a white individual, and all the cherubim around God are white. And as believers, we've been okay with that. We haven't said that's sacrilegious, that's contrary to the scripture, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. So if I said something heretical like Jesus is not God, you're supposed to run out the building or kick me out, one of the two, right? Because it's heretical, but then we'll allow for these depictions of the characters of the scripture to be okay and find them hanging on our walls and in our pictorial Bibles that we hand out to our kids. And so when I say Ham and Shem and Japheth as sons of Noah all have ethnicity, very few theologians will argue that the word Ham, the etymology of it means black, dark. And so Ham has these 4 boys, Cush and Mizraim and Put in Libya. And then Cush has this boy named Nimrod, and Nimrod is the founder of Nineveh, the Assyrians. And so the Assyrians married the Jews after capturing them in 722, and that created these dogs called Samaritans. And Jesus came to the Samaritans as the marginalized people. These marginalized people had color. And because the people who were supposed to be representing God didn't love them, they created their own God. They lived contrary to what the Bible has to say. And I'll just close with this. We have people of color choosing false religion, like black Hebrew Israelites, like Nation of Islam back in the 60s, because they don't see the people of God who supposedly know a God of love loving them.
All right. Amen.
We'll give you some time to process that a little bit. That was good. That's good, Dr. Sims. And let me say this to you, that there's only so fast that our conscious minds can process something and then decide instantly whether we agree or disagree. But your soul is getting it, right? There's a consciousness beneath, that is a subconscious beneath your conscious mind, that when you hear something and it resonates to the truth that God has established, it will ultimately come into your conscious mind, but it's going to settle in there for a little bit. And if you're spirit-led and you walk with God, you'll be able to do like a plate of chicken, eat the meat and spit out the bones. So you don't have to eat the whole thing, but you should eat the good portion that gives you strength. And so we do that. And then we take that and use that to create the path forward that God has determined. That's good. It was well done. Jesse's going to tackle the present for us. Give us some history of what's going on right now.
Thank you, Pastor G. And I just want to thank you for your leadership and salute you for your moral courage to have these types of dialogues that are so important today. Right now I feel like we are really facing 5 concurrent crises in our country. We're seeing the crises of public health with COVID-19 and mass pandemic for the first time in over 100 years. We're seeing a crisis of mass unemployment and uncertainty in the economy. And we're seeing a crisis of racism in our institutions. We're seeing a crisis of a lack of moral leadership, I think, in all spaces across our country. And then we're finally seeing a crisis of our spirit in our country, a spiritual awakening that is taking place. And I think all of these crises have one thing in common, and that's they're rooted in systems. They're systemic. And systemic problems require systemic solutions. We can't just put a Band-Aid on it and expect it to go away. And I really feel like for a long time, it kind of, as Pastor Sims alluded to, we've been defending these false narratives. We talk about the original sin of America. We talk about slavery. No, it was actually the erasure of indigenous people. And that false narrative thus creates a divide in our communities, especially our communities of color. We talk about the false narrative of equal justice under the law from the beginning in this country, which we know not to be true. And we talk about the false narrative of everyone being equal, and we know that not to be true. And so I think we have to really acknowledge truth before we can move to reconciliation and healing and progress. We try to jump steps, right? We try to, okay, we're going to reconcile this problem we've made in the past or this mistake we've made as a country without acknowledging that first truth. And what that does is, for people that were on the other end of that, they're experiencing an internal unhealing. We're not being healed because we haven't been able to acknowledge this happened to this person or this group of people, and we have to acknowledge that across the board. And so I really hope that one of the things that I talk about is to young people is how can everyone have a moral consistency about themselves and a truth, so you can speak your truth and speak it authentically and not be afraid. And I am hopeful, though, because we're seeing across this country young people standing up, knowing their rights. The young people today know their rights that I didn't know when I was in high school. And they are not afraid to call people out. There's sort of a cancel culture that I've experienced myself working in education. But what I'm trying to tell them is, how do we call people into the conversation? When we're organizing, how do we then mobilize that organizing then to create solutions? And I think it does start with truth, and then it becomes calling people into a conversation where we can come together in solidarity. And I really appreciate the work that Pastor G is doing, because I think that's what we're talking about here is we're seeing these institutions across our country that need transformation. But yet, in order to get to transformation, you have to start with reformation and then reforming yourself and your mind and being able to think critically and assess the world around you. And I think that's where we're at right now as a country, is we need to have a reassessment or a critical self-inventory of where we've been in the past, where we are now, and where we want to go in the future.
Well said. Well said. As an athlete, a former athlete, I didn't realize how former I was until my wife bought a Peloton, and I got on and started working out, and I realized I'm no longer an athlete. But when you set goals for the year, the goal is obviously to win the championship, and you set on that. But if you're not going to win the championship if you don't have the components necessary, functioning at the right place at the right time, a spirit of unity and selflessness to get it done. All right? And some teams do that so well that they win a lot. And some teams are so dysfunctional at that they never win. And so what we have to do is receive some information we received, and here's where we are. What's our path forward? Where are we going to the next level? So I'm going to do two things. One, we're going to open up the Q&A, but we're going to speak some and hear more from our leaders here. But if you have a question and you're watching online, I'm going to give you a number. So if you want to grab a pen or a piece of paper and write it down, and you can text in a question or a comment that you have, and we'll try to address that. Now, we can't probably address them all, but we'll try to get to the ones that you text in. The number is 425-553-3920. 425, it's online, you can see it on screen, 425-553-3920. And just text a question or a comment. If you want to direct that to somebody, then you can do that as well, but we're going to open it up to this team. And at some point in time, I'm going to ask you guys, and certainly you're open at any point in time to make any comments you want to, that we talk about the path forward. What do you think is the best path? What could we do as individuals? And what can we do within our Metron, your measure of rule, that I'm committed to in my personal life or for this house, or whatever God has marked you that you think is the best path for us to go, to bring unity back in our communities. We have some certain responsibility as a church that we haven't effectively collectively stood for, but the church is a unique animal. Different styles, different flows, different people, still the same church, right? The body of Christ. That gives you some idea and understanding that God, the God that created us, is a diverse God, and he embraces us all. It is difficult when you live within inside yourself and you're comfortable with yourself to look at somebody else that's tremendously different than you and to embrace them. But you should. You have to get into a life habit of embracing that. So, and the only way to do that is through love. Love is a powerful force that never fails and overrides everything else. If you experience hate and you give back hate, you have double hate. That hate is not neutralized, and you both walk away with hate, and you're going to give more hate because you're just hurt and struggling. And hurt people. And the most dangerous situation you can find yourself in the woods is you run across a bear or an animal that is hurt. And they will attack you when they normally would pass you by because they're hurt. So we have to recognize we have hurting people that we're connected to. And we have to find a path to help heal their reality. And it's different for everybody. If you dismiss their reality as though it's insignificant and not real, you marginalize them, and they are not going to embrace that long term. And you're going to release more hurt, more hate, more pain, more suffering. When the responsibility for us as leaders in our community, wherever you are, you're a leader in your Metron, your measure of rule, is to do something constructive and significant so that we can do it together and bring a positive solution. So I lead with love. That's kind of my action item. I'm going to lead with love. It doesn't mean that I do it right all the time. Derzek can tell you that for sure. But I'm better than I used to be. Let me say it like that. And I'm getting better as time goes on. I'm committed to leading with love. I'm committed to embracing other people. I'm committed to standing firm in the things that God has for me, but also to reach out to somebody across the aisle. I'm committed to that. And I may not like them, but I love them. I've had to learn to like people, because some people are different than you, and you just don't instantly like them. But I've come in with a mindset that I'm going to love them. And as I commit to that, then I start, as time goes on, to like them too. And then we build a friendship and a bond. So let me encourage you to do that as well, or whatever you're doing now that you can add to the conversation that you think is good. So I'm going to open it up to any of you guys that feel like there's a statement or a plan or a way of thinking or a life that you have committed to that you think would help us in this path forward as a community. Then I want to receive that, and then we'll open up to Q&A in a second. Go ahead.
I'll go ahead and get it started. You know, I think it's important, excuse me, it's important, I think, to approach, your neighbors with love and respect. It's also truly important. I was a prosecutor for 19 years. And first with the city of Renton for 3 years, and then with King County for 16 years. And I actually said that experience actually made me much more understanding of the human condition and actually much more compassionate, because I saw people sometimes at different times, sometimes the worst part of their lives. And I think that what I used to tell young prosecutors I trained, because I was in the office for a long time, is you should always treat the person on the other side, at the other table in a courtroom, like it's your brother, or it's your sister, or it's your mother, and understand that this is their lowest moment. and that the goal is to make sure that I remember one time I was picking a jury, and one of the parties, either the judge or the defense attorney, says, well, you speak for the state, or whatever that is. And I said, I'm also here on behalf of the defendant. And we need to have that idea that police officers and people in the system, that are working at every level, work especially for the people that are at the other table, and to approach them with compassion and love and respect. And I think that's critically important. As police officers, I think, have a very difficult job, and our chief and our other chief are going to talk about this, and they face difficult circumstances. But I think the most important thing is to treat people with respect and kindness, and really the benefit of the doubt, when you encounter them. And then it's important that the systems reflect these values and transparency and accountability, because people will fall short and will, and will disappoint themselves or the other people around it. So it's critical that these systems have accountability and transparency. And so, that's something that but we also need to learn from each other and to listen. I think the most important thing, one of the things I've done as mayor, and I'll just say this when I get done talking, is that the most important thing we do as human beings sometimes, most of the time, and I've learned this the hard way, is not to talk, is to listen, and truly listen and hear the people that we encounter. And if we do that with love and compassion and transparency and accountability, I think we're better for it. So I just like you said, I'm a work in progress, as we all are, and I'm trying to get better every day. And I'm honored to do the job I do as mayor. And we can do better at the City of Federal Way. We're committed to doing that. But the first thing that we're doing really right now is really listening and doing how we can reach out and understand. I think actually one of the last point I want to make is that there's this conversation that we're having nationally, and this convulsion that we're having in our national consciousness and in our streets is rooted in really two Americas, in which I don't believe that the side that is not demonstrating, that the people that are not aggrieved, I don't think they truly understand the perspective of this institutional racism and being pulled out of a car for no reason, or being stopped repeatedly, or whatever the circumstances have been in their own lives. And that draws a severe reaction and a course correction. So what we really need to do is help those other people listen and hear and respond with love and compassion.
Pastor G, I agree with you that we have to love everyone, and that's where we start. I am not as good as you because I do not find that I like everyone that I have to love. There are going to be some people in our lives, I think, that we have to agree that we can find some commonality, but there's going to be something that separates us. But if we can connect with what we agree on, that is a good start. But I think you are further in your journey on that than I am in mine. So I will take your lead, and I will continue to try and turn that love into like in some situations. Right now, we are having very, very uncomfortable situations all over this country. In the city of Auburn, there are uncomfortable conversations going on every day, as they should. I will tell you that in my office, and I'm sure Mayor Farrell gets the same, I will get emails that are in support of the protests and Black Lives Matter, and I will have emails on the other side that says, don't you dare, don't you dare. And it's the reality that people think that for someone else to be considered equal, that they have to lose something, that there is something that they're going to have to give up in order for someone else to be respected and treated as an equal. And that is simply not true. It's not a pie. It's not a finite amount of privilege or experience or anything else. It's infinite. And we, as a body of people, need to realize that we don't have to give anything up. We have so much to gain by looking at our neighbors, by looking at those around us and realizing, what can I learn from you that's going to make my life richer? And what perhaps can I share with you to make your life richer? We have so much to gain by opening our minds, opening our hearts, having those challenging, very uncomfortable situations. We have to address what has happened in the past. We are not going to unravel 400 years plus of institutional racism in this country in a day or in a week. And when the next big news item hits, we can't forget about this path that we're on right now. We have to remember that it's the people in our lives, it's the people that are hurting, that we need to be focusing our attention on, regardless of what's going on else around us, that love is there, that we carry each other in our times of need. Each one of us is going to have that time of need. And if we all lift together, it is such a better place for us to be in. And I realize that that is a long time coming, and it's not going to happen overnight. But if we can all agree that that's the path that we need to journey ourselves on, then I think we are so much far better, and we are better moving forward.
Yeah, that's well said.
Can we define systemic racism really quick?
Please, go.
Because I think we say it a lot, and my experiences in the church, most of us don't know what it means. It means that systems were built for white people to keep white people in power. And so all the systems, the education system, the financial system, the justice system. And so for me, what the forward path is that our white brothers and sisters really need to take time to listen. And it's hard to listen, but to understand. And so the scripture that I thought about was, so the word became human and made his home among us. I don't believe that as believers we have the right to judge anyone if we're not going to make our home among them. So whether it's gay or lesbians, homeless people, drug addicts, it's very easy to judge someone you're not in relationship with. It becomes very hard to judge someone that you're in relationship with. And so through my career, I've had the chance to be among, and it changes your perspective. And the last thing I'll say is that we also need to educate ourselves on the legislative process, because we judge too quickly. And so I say among us, also with elected officials. I can't imagine, but I see every day how hard it is to make one decision. Just one. Half the people want you to stop the Black Lives Matter protest. The other half wants you to keep it going. Defund the police, don't defund the police. Shut down Chaz, don't shut down Chaz. I don't envy elected officials. I respect them, but it is an unbelievable second by second, split second decision that they have to make. And 90% of the time, both CNN and Fox sensationalize it or get it wrong. And then we make judgments about who we're gonna vote for, or what our views are, based on really untrue things. I've sat in a room and listened to a meeting and turned the news on and heard the exact opposite said. And so I would just encourage us to get among them so that we can understand. Jesus came down among us so that he can understand us and be an advocate. He didn't stand back and just say, you shouldn't be this, you shouldn't be that.
Yeah, that's good, Tiffany. You know, there's no great progress and no great change that doesn't involve pain. There's always going to be some pain. If you're gonna take a new mountain, there's going to be some pain. If you're going to win something, there's going to be some pain. If you're going to sacrifice something, there's going to be some pain. So don't be afraid of the pain. There is some pain. You have to help people along the journey with pain. And I want you to understand this: that physical pain is limited. Emotional pain, it can last for a long, extended time. So you have to be there to help somebody who is processing change through pain. And we all have pain. But when you can come through the pain, you'll find that you've created something or dynamic and powerful, that a whole new place that you can live in and others can live in, because you're willing to make the sacrifice. And so, you know, we've all made some sacrifices, and we've made sacrifices as people groups. So we have to continue the process. Who else would like to speak to it? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for doing this, to both pastors. I mean, this is tremendous in terms of just focusing in on these issues, and then talking about where do we need to go in the future. You know, for me, from the business community, we focus on making the South Sound the best place to do business in Washington State, period. to do that, you need everybody on board. You need unity. You can't have disenfranchised communities. We need everybody on board. And when I look back, and you know, a couple of you mentioned, you know, the first thing we need to do is listen and learn. Tawana at the Tacoma Urban League, she gave me a read, listen, watch. Books, podcasts, other things. And I think that's what we need. We need to be spending this time really understanding of where we've come from, where we're at, and then we can start to talk about where we need to go. You know, for me, I know, and for our organization, you know, so that's been our filter, is making the South Sound the best place to do business. But, and I can say that we've been anti-racist, you know, in terms of we're against, you know, obviously against that, but there's a difference between being anti and now we're moving to being an organization or against racism, and now we're going to be an organization that's anti-racist. And that's might sound a little bit of a word switch there, but being anti something means that we're proactive. Yeah. We're stepping up. And so it's also like being from a, you know, it's one thing to be an ally, but it's another is being really working and being an advocate, not having to stand next to somebody, but stepping out front. And that's where we're moving to as an organization and as a business community. We aren't standing still anymore. We need to step up. And so we needed the communities to come together. We need to have the discussion. You talk about systemic, it's in education, it's in criminal justice, it's in the business community, it's all around. And so we need to start within our own houses. And I mean that by organizations, could be in your house as well, but in your organization, what are those policies, what are the barriers that are actually in place that prohibit, you know, people of color on any level, whether it's membership, whether it's entry, whether it's employment. There are things that are barriers, not, you know, hopefully not intentionally put there, but there are barriers. And so we're looking, I can tell you, what are those barriers and how do we remove those? And really starting internal before we go external.
In terms of police and police reform, I would tell you that it's been going on for decades. I got into police work in 1988, and I remember the first significant incident that we can all recall, which was a Rodney King incident in 1991. When that incident occurred, one of the things that major reform was moving police organizations to community-oriented policing, meaning to build trust with the community. In order to get like federal grants, you had to be community-oriented policing. So sometimes money talks, but most organizations, police organizations in this country are community-oriented policing in an effort to build trust. One of the other things was to bring diversity into police work, minorities, women into police work, and we've been working on that for decades. And we have quite a diversity now in law enforcement, because when I got into police work in 1988, I was the only Asian officer in the entire county, in Thurston County. And when I look at the police force now, it doesn't matter which agency that you look at, it looks different. Is there more work that needs to be done? Absolutely. So those are some of the reforms that's taken place, and it'll be ongoing. And later on, I'd like to share with you, I've been involved with quite a few discussions with WASPC, which is the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, also with the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And so we have some, as police chiefs and sheriffs, we have moving forward, path forward as to what we might recommend as an organization. And one of the key things, I know police reform is in the spotlight. Police is in the spotlight. And I want to just build on a little bit of what Representative Johnson said here. And I'll say it a little different way. And I've done a lot of community engagements over the years. If you're just looking at the police and police reforms to address the issue, we're never going to get there. I would tell you that we need to work on, social issues, social economic issues. And what I see from police business is, a lot of people got addicted to opioid, right? Pain pills. And we haven't recovered from that. So if you want to reduce violent police encounters, because we're asked to enforce the law, right? We go to a domestic violence call. Sometimes we have to make an arrest. And we will de-escalate. We will bring 2-3 officers to try to calm things down. At some point, you have to make an arrest. And at some point, you have to have cooperation. So de-escalation can only go so far. But what's happening in our society now is with a drug addiction is driving crime, it's driving violent encounters with police. So we still need to make sure we treat people with drug addiction, but we need to work on that. That's one issue. Another issue is homelessness issue, mental health issue, and I won't get into each one of those, but I'm telling you that right now, today, even if you have mental health professionals, and there's a lot of talk about that, or fire department not going into unsafe situation, if we have someone that's exhibiting unusual behavior, they're going to call the police. Until we say the scene is safe, there is no mental health treatment. There is no social worker coming in to help, because even social workers call the police and say, hey, I need to talk to this person, but I don't know that I'm safe. So those are the things, and I would tell you we got to work on education. You know, if education, and at least my parents and my belief is we got to get people where equal opportunity to be educated and to have equal chance having success in life. And having a good job gives you self-worth. And so those are some of the things that we need to work on. But if you're counting on police to address these issues, we're never going to get there. The men and women, we're very careful about who we hire. We're very conscientious about giving them the right training, the tools to do their job. So I work with a lot of good men. They have an incredibly difficult and challenging job. Even with all this COVID thing that occurred, I mean, we went from being heroes. In fact, our popularity was so good, Congress was going to give medical workers and first responders, police and fire, up to $25,000 as bonus pay. And that was in March. Now we find ourselves with police brutality. We're at an extreme, we went from one end to the other. But I would tell you that maybe what's not played or shared in the media or in the local newspapers, we still have a tremendous amount of support from our community. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that we don't receive cards, letters, emails. If you're on a diet, please don't come by the police station, because the business community, residents are bringing us food like on a daily basis. So that does encourage our officers. The people recognize that they have a difficult job. And what are we responding to? We're responding to what our elected people are asking us to do. And the elected officials represent all of you. So when there's gun violence, what are we asked to do? We're asked to stop the gun violence, right? So in federal way, I'll just talk about where we have gun violence. And we have gun violence in the Westway community. So we spend an enormous amount of time there trying to deter gun violence. And who lives in the Westway community? It's people of color. So there's more opportunities for encounters. So unless we deal with the poverty issue, all the social issues that I mentioned, we're stuck in the middle. Because when gun violence occurs, I got to report to the mayor and give him details. And then he wants to know, Chief, what are your steps to address it? Because it's creating a lot of fear in the community. So we need to work on those issues. And if people ask me more about statistics, I will share statistics with you. Is there a disproportionate amount of force used on black members of our community? I would tell you yes. The U.S. population for black is 13%. In 2019, of all police killings, 23% of African Americans were killed at the hands of police. This year, so far, 20%. So when police use force, 80% of the time, or 77% of the time in 2019, we're not against a black community or community member. So I wanted to share that information with you. Sometimes we're in a difficult situation. When we're encountering force, we're just human beings. We're not hiring MMA fighters. They're just people off from our community. We provide them with the best training we can, and sometimes they're in an incredible, difficult situation. 150 officers generally get killed in the line of duty each year. And we're probably on a record pace this year because in recent weeks, there's been more killings of police officers and injuries to officers. Officers are on edge. Officers are receiving threats. Their families are being threatened. So this is a very unusual and uncomfortable time for law enforcement. And I don't want to take up all the time, but I wanted to just kind of give you police perspective. Yes, what we saw in Minneapolis, appalled. I was watching that, like, get off his neck. That's at the extreme end, but I want to tell you that vast majority of men and women, we hire good people, good training, and they have an incredibly difficult job.
I think one thing that we need to work on is tearing down the barriers that prevent trust between our community members and the police. I had a conversation with one of our community members recently, and I told him about an experience I had trying to get, with the changes to 940, we all had to get community members to come and be our community representative should we have an OIS. And I talked about the challenges of trying to get our community involved to want to apply for that and be a part of it. And it was pointed out to me, well, people don't trust the police, so they're not going to be a part of a system that they don't trust. And so I think we need to tear down those barriers so that we can build that trust. And I think one thing that we need to do is be more transparent with what we're doing. It has been a word for years about being trust and transparent. Unfortunately, for the police side, nobody really came to us and said, hey, here's how you can be transparent and build trust. There's been a few ideas thrown out there, but it's been left up to us to figure out how to do it. And in some situations, we've been doing a good job, and in some situations, we've been failing. But we need to be able to have that trust so that we can learn how to be more transparent and build that relationship. I think we also need to allow our law enforcement officers to be more human. We're human beings, but the community doesn't want to see that. When acts of violence are occurring, there's an active school shooter. We expect our police officers to have the courage, not show any emotion, run in there and deal with that. But they're still human beings. There's no other profession in the world where a police officer, I saw this on the news the other day, has to stand on the line and listen to somebody get right in their face and call them every name in the book, and they cannot respond. As soon as they respond, they're the one that's in trouble now. But if you go in the Wendy's and you tell the Wendy's employee that they screwed up your sandwich and you go off on them, you get arrested for disorderly conduct or maybe trespassed. And so I think we need to work together with our community so that our community can see that 99% of all police officers are good people that just want to do a job to protect all of us, to build a safe community for all of us to live. And they're not out there trying to, be the bad apple, if you will. Unfortunately, just like every profession, some get in there. And I think here in the Pacific Northwest, we're very lucky. I have these conversations with my mayor all the time and let her know how lucky we are to be in the Pacific Northwest for as progressive as we are when it comes to law enforcement. It blows my mind that there's parts of the country where they don't have certifications yet for law enforcement officers. We've had certifications for police officers here in the state of Washington since 2001 or 2002. That 8 that can't wait. It blows my mind that there's places out there in the country where officers aren't required to intervene or report excessive force. That's been a policy the 21 years I've been a police officer. I've never worked in a time where we haven't done that. But because we try to not be human, I don't think we do a very good job at sharing our story and letting our community knows how much we do and how much training we do and how professional we are as a law enforcement agency. For example, there's always headlines about police need more training. But I bet you would be surprised to know that at the Auburn Police Department, and I'm sure it's the same with Federal Way and everybody else in the Valley because we're very similar, but we do an average of 17,000 hours of training every year, and we have 140 employees in the Auburn Police Department. That's a lot of training that we're getting. We do defensive tactics 4 times a year, and each part of that has de-escalation built into it. And at the end of the year, we have mock scenes where we test what you learn throughout the year and your ability to de-escalate situations and engage in crisis communication. And we need to get our community involved to see that and also learn what our community expects of us in certain situations so that we can improve what we're doing. And so I think that's what we're doing to move forward. In Auburn, I'm putting a lot of things in place long before this started. I started these ideas when I stepped into the chief role in November to engage our community. Unfortunately, COVID is putting us behind the curve. You know, a lot of our community events are canceled. Our opportunities to engage the community in positive ways have been reduced, which makes it more of a challenge. But on the flip side, another thing that we're starting is we're starting a police advisory committee that's going to involve our community and representatives from each background that represents our community, and we're going to come up with a plan to see what our community wants for policing, but also give raw information to our community members about how we do policing so that there's an understanding and there's not assumptions and inaccuracies, and the national narrative doesn't become the narrative for the Pacific Northwest. Thanks.
That's good. You know, I have a couple questions, so I'm going to give this first one that came online to Jesse. It says, you mentioned that we need to acknowledge truth before tackling reconciliation. How long do you acknowledge the past and hurts before taking steps to head towards reconciliation?
That was a great question whoever asked. I mean, it ties in perfectly to what's being talked about because one of the things that I really appreciated what a couple folks said is, how do we humanize policy? How do we humanize institutions? How do we humanize legislation? And have someone in mind that we know that this is going to have tangible impact to their lives. And I think first, when we're talking about truth, we have to be able to acknowledge it. And then in that truth, there has to bear some type of fruit, right? When we talk about, in this country, the black community, and what was promised when slavery ended, reparations, 40 acres and a mule, and it's never been acknowledged to this day by the government that was promised. That was a promise that was made and was then not fulfilled. And so we have to be able to acknowledge those truths that the country was founded on equal justice under the law, yet we have not achieved it to this point. I really love what the officer was talking about with advisory, because it's not the chief's fault, it's not the police fault that there's legislation that does or does not exist that will increase this transparency and accountability that we're looking for. That's on elected officials. That's on us to make sure that there's community oversight and transparency, that there's independent investigations. They can't come out and create that policy. That has to be on elected officials to do that work in conjunction with community recommendations and police recommendations. And so I really think when we're talking about that truth part, it just has to be an acknowledgement at all levels, in all spaces, but especially by our elected officials and leaders to acknowledge that, and then this is our path forward. And so I just wanted to say that, and you're totally right, Chief, when you talk about economic justice and the tale of two countries that we live in, and the power of social, economic, and political power in the hands of too few, while the people of color and the marginalized and low income do not have any say in they're at the mercy of the power of too few. And so I think we need to really look at the economic side of this country. That's a huge piece of that reconciliation we talk about. But that question, I think if we acknowledge it from a national standpoint, it will go a long way in being able to reconcile and heal and hopefully lead to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Yeah, because just acknowledging is key, but reconciling it, coming to terms with it, fixing it is a huge. And as you provide that, then the basics that people need to have: food, a place to sleep, somebody that loves them and cares for them. Those are fundamental things that we all need. Let me give you another question. I'm opening up to anybody who wants to answer it. How can you have a conversation with someone who is hurt? The response is empathy, but that is not a viable context for healthy conversation, particularly when we discuss changing systems, the shift, the instability. Sometimes the most vulnerable place you have is when you're going from one place to another place, even if the places that you're in is bad. You get comfortable with it. You get used to it. And so making the change to something else can be tricky and difficult. Who wants to kind of attack that? Go ahead.
Real
Tracy, thank you.
quickly, how can you have a conversation with someone who's hurt in responding to empathy, but not everybody who is hurt is only hurt. There are a lot of people in this country who are both hurt and looking for a solution. So you can have futility if the person who is hurt only wants to be heard. But hurt and damage can be there can be impetus there to create change. And so I think the goal is to have empathy, but while you're having the conversation, search for a solution. Does this person or this system or this organization have some valuable input? And so in our communities, the same thing. And I don't mind hearing somebody who is cussing every other word and incredibly angry if what comes out of that is, oh, but I've got a solution. Okay, give it to me. I'll listen to you. So I think hurt can be a viable context for healthy conversation if a solution is the end point. I don't know if somebody has something.
It's good. Anybody else?
I would just also say that oftentimes we think that validation requires agreement, and validation doesn't require agreement. Just because I don't see it the way you see it doesn't mean I can't take the time to have compassion for your pain. And it's our unwillingness to have compassion for other people's pain that causes them to define us as being racist, or they feel dehumanized by us, or whatever those other negative things are. And so we're failing to get on one accord because we're failing to acknowledge that even if I didn't intend to cause you the pain, if it happened on my watch, if I'm associated with it, then I can acknowledge it simply so that we can get to the next level of healthy conversation. And so I'm excited about the pastors here at OCC willing to create this platform, because when we talk about media, whether it's CNN or Fox News, when we had our challenges in Seattle 3 weeks ago and 4 squad cars were placed on fire, just 120 yards away from that stage was a clergy-sponsored stage with people singing hymns and singing songs, from Zion and gathering together of all these various ethnicities. And you had cameramen climbing on that stage to view the other stage without ever just panning the camera 6 inches to show hundreds of people who were on one accord. And so one of the conversations that Pastor Gordon and I had was, if everybody in this room brought their constituency to one location, because we have such great diversity in this room, we would be able to demonstrate that everybody isn't trying to hold up a sign that says blank the police. Everybody isn't trying to break into Old Navy. Everybody isn't trying to just talk about situations without talking about solutions to systems. We keep addressing situations. We're not addressing systems. And so since we're not addressing systems, we're gonna be here again. I'll see you in 30 days. I'll see you in 4 months. We'll be here. And so one of the things that I was encouraged by is Pastor saying that he wanted to see us create with this entity something that's sustainable, something that we can look forward to in July, or look forward to in August, or look forward to in September, because it's going to take some kind of regular, intentional, difficult platform for us to get past what we haven't been able to successfully do historically. And so there is a rally on the 18th, and we have flyers for everybody. It is a desire for us to demonstrate reconciliation. And so I'll just say this in short: there's not going to be a plenary speaker. There's not going to be an activist citing from Trayvon, give you all history. Nothing wrong with that. What we're going to do is have a pastor who is of the dominant culture and a community activist who's African American, and they're going to explain how the rift that was between them was resolved. That we're going to talk about reconciliation in our own community. A worship leader from a predominantly white church and a worship leader from a predominantly black church that seemingly couldn't get on one accord for worship together, that actually had conversation, and now the churches are coming together. We need to demonstrate reconciliation within the body before we can even ask anybody else to, quote unquote, live it out. If we're not modeling it, we have no right to expect other people to follow it. So hopefully you will talk to the members and those in leadership of your ministries, which is why we invited all of these different ministries of many of you who are here, so that we can at least have some physical demonstration or manifestation that we can do life together for his glory.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And you can't do it once. We have to do one and dones won't bring change. It has to be over and 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 over. You get it? And over and over and over and over and over again. You have to repeat the process over again. And it has to be detailed. You have to be good at it. You have to work at it. You can't quit on it. You can't give up. So if you're going to live by love, here's the next question somebody sent in. It says, Pastor G, you talked about leading with love, but does the Bible say to fight for justice? How do you reconcile the two? Well, God is the fighter. He's the one that brings justice. The challenge that we have to bring it universally as humans is we bring justice in a temporary way. And I'm not saying that's bad. It's the best we can do. But a true justice can't be, a verdict can't be given until all the information is gathered. So you have a prosecution, and the prosecution lays the case. Then you have a defense attorney, and the defense lays their case. And then the judge or the jury, who's ever judging it, will go back and they'll deliberate. They'll talk about it. What about this? What about that? And they'll come to, help me now, a just decision if it's a good court. They'll come to a just decision. And so they'll make a just decision, but in a year, new information can come to the table. Something that wasn't available before. And since that information wasn't available, the decision now that was a just decision with current information is now a bad decision. And then you have to make a new decision. So who's the only person that can make just and righteous decisions all the time? Is God. Someone who doesn't live in time. Someone who measures. Now the challenge with walking with God is he does things in his way. And he expects us to be accountable to him instead of him being accountable to us. And so we have to learn the system now that things are going to happen. So how do I respond to that? I forgive. What's my action item for love? Forgive. Forgiveness doesn't mean that the other person confesses their fault. If you're waiting for somebody to confess their fault before you forgive them, you're still under their power. And you surrendered your freedom that comes from forgiveness to them because you're waiting on them to confess their fault. Listen, why don't you just get free? Let's just get free. Let's not hold people in captivity based on waiting somebody who's completely wrong to turn around and do what is right. You just get free. Hi, I'm going to forgive you. Just going to let it go. I'm not going to hold it. I'm going to let it go. I've had lots of opportunities growing up in South Central LA with interactions with different police and different officials and different things that were kind of scary or bad for me. And so I could either internalize those or I can release it. I can let it go. You got to forgive. You have to make a choice to forgive. And this is how you do that. Here's your action item. You got to open up your mouth and say, I forgive whoever that is and name what they did, for lying about me, for beating me up. Well, I can't do that. Yes, you can. But it takes some courage to do it. It takes some strength to do that, right? And you may be more emotional as you come through that process because it's going to bring that emotion back out. It's going to bring the pain of what you experienced back out. Because sometimes we can bury it. We don't want to bury it. We want to deal with it. We want to construct it. I remember I was taking one of my boys to school and I was driving up on 410 headed to Bonnie Lake. And we were running a little late, his fault, but... But you forgave him. Yeah, I forgave him, right. And there was the police officer who was driving in front of me. And I didn't want to go past him, obviously. That would have been bad. But he sped up. When he sped up, I sped up. And he sped up again, so I sped up again. Then he was smoking pretty good, so I was smoking pretty good with him. And then he puts his lights on and pulls over, and I knew I was in trouble. So I pulled off, and we're on the highway, and he comes to the car, and he is smoking hot. I mean, he is mad. He said, "Are you out of your mind? What do you saw me speed? Well, why would you be speeding? You know what the speed limit is here?" So he was hot. So he asked me for my registration and my license, and I gave it to him and went back to the car. And when he came back, he's still pretty mad. And I said to him, "Officer, I'm sorry. That was out of order, and it won't happen again." He said, "What did you say?" And I said it was out of order, because it was. It was just wrong for me to do that. I apologize, it won't happen again. He goes back to his car, he comes back and says, "Mr. Banks, come on, get your son to school. And slow it down, man. What are you doing? I could be on a call, and you're going way too fast. Get your son to school. Thank you." And it just diffused it. It just diffused it. And I'm just telling you, sometimes if we can take something and just diffuse it, is that going to erase systematic racism? No, it won't. Not in itself. But it's what you can start doing to change an atmosphere little by little, day by day, week by week, year by year. And then we can start attacking the economic disparities and education and drugs and mental illness and homelessness that are rampant. But we start now making decisions because we're unified together and we operate together.
I don't think, Gordon, that we have to live under the assumption that love and justice aren't linked together.
Yeah.
Because the reason why we are seeking justice is because of love. Right. And the reason why we're having conversation is because of love. We have a love for our country. We have a love for our community. We have a love for people. And so love and justice does not have to go, it's not contrary. But I think it goes hand in hand, because I don't believe that you will find true justice unless it's birthed out of love.
Dr. Marshall in San Francisco came up with a terminology called the disease of violence. And he asked the president, I think it was Bush, to treat violence as a public health issue because it's both preventable, identifiable and preventable. And he started the Omega Boys Club in San Francisco, and I took a training at the Police Training Academy. It's like in Des Moines where all the police get, with the red carpet. Yeah. And so he cusses a lot, but if you can get past that, it's really good information. And he basically said the community has an immune system, and if the immune system is weak, it's prone to disease. And if the immune system is strong, it can fight disease. And so he started to talk about the commandments of violence. And one of them is hate the police, get money by any means necessary. And I reflect back, Nikita, who's an advocate in Seattle, said, when the police come, the police are for you, not us. She was talking to Mayor Durkin. And she said, because when the police come to our neighborhood, we don't feel safe. And I said, well, I feel safe. Like, I just thought, well, you're talking about for all of us. And then I had to stop and say, but I didn't always. It was through, like, healing, forgiveness, and deliverance, because I remember being 6 years old and watching my brother, who was shot and killed in Skyway 13 years ago, lived his whole life in jail. I saw him head down on the ground in the rain, crying, saying, "Get off me, I didn't do anything wrong," by police. And as a 6-year-old, you don't understand there's good guys and bad guys. You just see somebody hurting somebody you love over and over again. And so his point was, I had been infected with the disease of violence. And so for no reason, I just didn't like the police. You add NWA and all the other stuff and the riots, and all you see is them arresting people you love. So he talks about how do you get free from the disease of violence? And how do we help young people get free from the disease of violence? Because if you put yourselves in their shoes, talking about empathy, and you think about the fact that if you were raised in a house with parents who were addicted to drugs and you needed money. So when I was a chaplain in the juvenile, the first person I met with was a 15-year-old who was going to be tried as an adult, which I don't agree with at all, for murder, because he jumped someone with his friends and just happened to kick him in the wrong place in his head, and he died. And so he said in a letter, he asked me if I'd read the letter that he was going to give to the judge. He basically said, I didn't have a mom, I didn't have a dad, and he kind of went through it. And so continuously ask yourself, I'm talking about the question that said, how do you have the conversation? Listen to how you would feel if you were that person. So take your whole experience out of your mind and what you think is right or wrong, but where would you be if you grew up in the same way they would grow up? And I would admit that if we all grew up in some of the ways that we've seen, all of us would be a mess. And so once you do that and you get to combat the disease of violence by undoing systemic racism, then you can have a conversation where it's not about you, it's about the person that you're talking to.
That's good. It's well said, Tiffany. Well said. We're over time. This is not the end, but it's the end of today. But I want to take at least one more question. We'll take this one more that was texted in. It says, how, and anybody can answer that. It's how do we prepare the next generation to understand that there is potential for racism without instilling fear of police or perpetuating a narrative of inequality? How will the cycle ever end? Somebody want to grab that? Feel like we have some solutions, or even the beginning of solutions to end the cycle. That was well said, Tiffany.
It's not a narrative. There is inequality. I think this next generation, I think the church is in danger of losing this generation because they're a generation of justice. And this is the first generation where they aren't going to listen to Pastor G because he says it's in the Bible. They're just not going to do it. Yeah. And so I think the question is, how do we allow this generation to engage in efforts around justice and racism? Because there's something in this generation, they just want justice. And I agree with you, Pastor D, that love and justice are the same. And then without instilling fear of police, by telling the truth. 99% of police aren't over here. I mean, statistically, the narrative's just not true. But in the instance that it is true, that's an injustice. And the cycle will end when we break the root, which in my estimation is the definition of systemic racism. It's the root. Right now, we're treating causes. Welfare checks are causes. Foster care is a treatment. Putting somebody in a shelter is a treatment. Putting somebody in drug rehabilitation is a treatment. We're not actually dealing with why people are homeless, why people are on drugs, why people are. That's the root, and that's systemic. Yeah. So I'm done now.
I'll take your mic, how's that? And I hate to go after you because it's well spoken. What I would say is, and it goes off of that, you know, we talk a lot here today about police. The police interactions with the police, however that works out, is not the root, right? I mean, and so I think we have how do we fix, help the next generation? What it is that we need to do something now. We have an opportunity that's in front of us. My organization is switching from being against to an anti-racism organization. I mean, that is going to be a filter in our group. We are stepping up, business community stepping up, and there's a change that's alive today that hasn't been there. And some people might say, well, where have you been? And I can tell you, I've got a good heart, and I've led well, but we have not stepped up to where we need to be, and we are stepping up. And that opportunity is in front of us, it's in front of all of us, and I think that's the difference, is that we need to show the generation that we can, start the process that needs to happen that hasn't happened. And it's right in front of us right now.
That's good.
Gordon, we've raised this generation. We have this up and coming generation in our own home. So we have a lot of conversation with our daughter and 4 boys, and they are very, very vocal. And so what we have learned is to empower their voice, even if it's not in that respectful way. We listen. And as the church, we're going to have to dismantle some of the culture that is not necessarily God, because, somebody wrestled with an angel. Somebody said, let's reason together. And so if we empower the voice of the next generation and we dismantle some of the cultural do's and don'ts for church conversation, I think if we are open and honest and we have this conversation, and we've seen it in our own home, it's more empowering, because a lot of times we are saying the same thing, just on a different wavelength. And that's where miscommunication comes in, where we're so focused on one particular thing, one particular way that it's been said, instead of really hearing the heart behind the conversation. And so in order to understand or empower and prepare the next generation as the body of Christ, we're going to have to learn to listen differently. And I think that's where the conversation begins with the next generation.
That's good. That's good. Listen, thank you so much. There's got lots been going on, and we want to transition out, and then we answer a couple questions here with you guys that are inside the house before we leave. But let me just end by saying this: if you're going to speak a problem, there's a lot of problems, a lot of issues. You speak a problem once, speak a solution twice. Try to leave a conversation and engagement on a positive vein, even if it's we agree to disagree. Right? Well, what's the positive of that? Well, we agree. There is some level of agreement there. I'm not your enemy. I hate you. I never believe you. You don't go there. Don't go there. If you're speaking something in your personal life, in your home, in your community, in your car as you're driving, if you heard something on TV or social media, don't let that negative anchor sit in your house or in your heart and let it grow and ruminate over and over and over and over again. And then you find yourself with behaviors that are inappropriate. If you're going to embrace that and speak a solution. Get a but God. The scriptures are full of, and this, but God, right? I call them the big buts of the Bible. And God has a lot of stuff where He's gonna embrace what's going on, but God healed them, but God restored them, but God blessed them, but God came and delivered them. Come on, just get into a life habit personally that you start adding the things that God can do, even if those are high expectations, because He's a real God, and He cares for us. We reach out and bless the community that's watching. Thank you for tuning in and being with us. It makes such a huge difference. May God be with you, to help you, to encourage you, to watch over you, and together, we find a solution. Together, we overcome. Together, we prevail. And the darkness will not prevail. The light will prevail, and we'll come back. Education will equalize, and righteousness will equalize, and mental health will be broken and done away with, and economic justice will start to reign in our land, because we start something small and it grows big over time. And so thank you for being here. Thank you for all the leaders who are here with us as well. All of you guys have influence, tremendous influence, greater than you actually know, and we appreciate that. And we're always open and available to help and to take things to the next level. So I'm going to sign off. To our online audience, appreciate your participation. We look forward to seeing you in some of the churches in our community over the weekend. God bless. Thank you.